So this week's episode about shit.
I don't want to talk about that for an hour. I am having some stomach issues.
Oh, you always are. Have you tried Greek yogurt?
Roll credits.
All right, welcome to Bonehead. I'm Joe Lewis.
Wait, are we starting over? Or what are we doing?
I just started.
What?
The cat finally left. No, there it is.
Oh, it came
No.
back
No.
the very next day. It just wouldn't stay away.
Anyway, so this is Bonehead. We sit around and talk about things.
Roll credits. I don't know when we're rolling credits. I'm just gonna.
You just
Oh my
keep
God!
saying roll credits.
Haley keeps rolling them every
It
time.
would be funny if we
This
rolled
will be-
like 3 different credits. Now people just
You know
get
who I
pissy.
don't want to roll? Roll Tide. Screw you, Alabama. Except for our viewers in Alabama, if we have any of your listeners, go Tide. Roll Tide. Woo!
Thank you, mouth breathers.
Why is your mascot an elephant and you go by Roll Tide?
I don't know. Is that true?
It's Crimson Tide and it's an elephant. None
That's
of this
a good movie.
makes
Have you ever
sense.
seen that movie with Denzel? Crimson Tide?
Oh.
You ever use any of that Tide that comes in the orange bottle? It gets clothes clean.
That's not crimson. That's orange.
Well, actually, it's not orange. It's blue, but it comes in an orange bottle.
Oh,
Why do they do that?
Lord, what is the topic of today's show? I don't know
The
either.
topic of today's show, all jest aside, is Harlan Ellison. We finally do one episode about a writer I care about. And why do we have to do it, Joe?
Because he's dead! Deader than hell!
I could have done that. You didn't ask me.
I knew you could do it. I was trying to give Joe a role in this.
Oh,
Yeah!
why?
Dead! Dead, bitch!
Dead.
He's dead!
Yeah,
Daddy's
he
dead!
Yes,
Daddy's
thank-
dead!
Thank you. That would be for Dale Earnhardt.
Fans. Yeah,
Fans.
yeah. So, we have a lot to talk about. Harlan not only was... He was one of my favorite writers, too. And I knew who he was before I met James Thomas. But James Thomas made him even more special. But it endeared him to me even more. And he just wrote so many things that just ended up influencing so many other things. And he has such a handprints on pop culture that I don't think a lot of people know.
Well, and I was about to say, and to get to that point,
And then he's also an asshole.
well,
Well, he was.
Huge jerk.
He's a
But-
huge jerk.
at many times for good purpose, and that's what I want to. If you've never read any Harlan Ellison, all of that
He's
stuff,
questioning the purpose.
I don't know about good purpose, but go on, James. We'll talk about it.
you don't believe marching with Martin Luther King?
Oh,
was a
no,
good
you're not
purpose?
gonna bring-
Oh my God, you bigot!
Okay,
I got you there.
He marched with Martin Luther King. One of the things that he is famous for.
You have to read it. Obviously, you're not a real fan.
I'm gonna punch you. Dangerous Visions. He edited. And one of his big complaints was there was no science fiction about
Yes, Bill.
minorities, written by minorities, or anything that he felt was dangerous, which is why he did Dangerous Visions, and he used his clout to get all these authors who were writing what he called speculative fiction about gay characters, about minorities, about all that stuff. And he did it in 1968, when it was not exactly the best time to be doing that.
Didn't he also? Did he march on Selma too?
Yes.
So, yeah,
He also marched for Mexican migrant workers, right?
He marched for
He
migrant.
did Nimoy.
He helped do strikes for writers and actors, and anytime he felt that systems were taking advantage of people. Now, he did not have a filter.
no.
In any way, shape, or form.
And I think that's one of the reasons I liked him, because often he said what I couldn't, or I wasn't smart enough to say at the time.
At the time.
But to that
His
point,
intelligence has grown so much over the years. You're
to
supposed to help me out here.
I'll get there.
that point, he was literally, until he died. Now he's no longer the most award-winning author, but he was considered the most award-winning living author until he passed away. He's no longer obviously living.
When did
so
he
lost
die?
the title. He died about 2 weeks ago.
What? This episode's just now coming out. Why did
Yes,
it take you
yes.
2 weeks to talk about your love life?
I had to get to a place where I could talk about it. Thanks for bringing up my suffering.
It's okay.
But to give you kind of the
I'm a good
Hugo
friend.
Award, which is given to science fiction.
Do they give him suits? Hugo Boss?
No, it's named after
Hugo Strange?
your mother.
Name after that guy off of Lost.
Yeah, that's it.
Or Hugo Weaving?
Oh my god, I love The Matrix.
I don't bet you he did. I bet you Harlan hated The Matrix.
You know, I don't
Harlan
know.
hated Star Wars.
He hated Star Wars.
Oddly
Liked
enough,
Empire Strikes Back.
Empire Strikes Back.
Hated Close Encounters of a Third Kind.
Why did he hate Close Encounters?
Because it was a ripoff of Et tu verrata Nicto? Gort.
Oh, The Day the Earth Stood Still.
He said he said it was a ripoff of the day. It's the exact same story.
Is it?
That's what he says.
Oddly
I
enough,
don't know that I agree with that. I've never heard that before. I have lots of Harlan stuff to talk about. Chad's been watching.
I've been
he hasn't
watching-
told you, but he's been
No.
watching for 2 days.
No, James knows. I've been
Oh,
talking to
well,
him
you
about
all
it.
never talk to me.
And this
bring
is
me
why
anything.
James-
Haley, why don't you talk to
And
me?
this is why James is going to be the expert, because every
She's
time I
waving
thought
at me.
the
The cat outside screaming talks to me more.
this is why this is going to be a James heavy episode, because every time I found something that I thought was amazing, James like, yeah, I heard about it. And I'm like, you're ruining my passions.
well, dude, this is what I
Oh
did.
my god, did you
He
watch
was-
that show?
Yeah,
That was
Passions.
a soap opera.
I know.
Well,
It
what
was no
happened
Dark
to that?
Shadows.
That and Santa Barbara. Oh.
Santa
Anyway.
Barbara.
Hugo Awards were for science fiction, speculative fiction. He
Named after Hugo Weaving.
he won 8.5 of them, famously half, because
A Boy and His Dog.
A Boy and His Dog, when it got adapted to a film, they
Which
gave
is
L.Q.
not a
Jones.
good movie.
They gave L.Q. Jones the award, and Harlan Ellison said, and let me quote, "What the hell? I wrote it. That's my award." And L.Q. Jones famously broke it in half and gave him half of it. He got the base that actually said A Boy and His Dog, and so he is the only person to have 8.5 Hugos.
Pretty
3
sure there's
Nebula
some French
Awards.
filmmakers who had 8.5, but that's all right. Let's not talk about fucking Fellini. Sorry, I didn't mean to drop the F bomb.
No, that's fine.
Haley, cut me out in post.
You want to do a show about Fellini?
That'd be
Not
a lot
really.
of film.
Then shut the hell up. Anyway, one about
Get
20,
your 8.5 in my face.
one
I'm
almost
joking. It's more like 2 3/4.
one almost 20 Locust awards.
Oh, do they eat themselves? Do they attack?
World Fantasy Award twice, British Science Fiction Award, Jupiter Awards, Saturn
World?
Awards,
Saturn. So what other riders are on Saturn?
the George. I'm going to screw this up and
Did he
Joe will
ever get an
correct me.
award from Uranus?
The George Milius.
Uranus has been talking to me all night.
The George
Giggity.
Milius Fantasy Film Award. George Milius. Is that pronounced Milius?
I mean John Milius, as in
No,
John
George,
Milius?
as in the guy that Earth to the Moon.
I think it's George Milius, yes.
Okay.
Milius.
Yeah. Asimov's Reader Poll Award he got. SF Chronicle Award, the Galleon Award for Lifetime Achievement.
Did you pick up that galleon of milk?
That
after
is
you-
just for science fiction. When it came to horror awards, he had 4 Stoker Awards.
Stroker. Ace?
Death Realm Award, the International Horror Critics Award. He actually was recognized them as the first living legend in 1995. And then you get into his mystery awards for his writing mysteries. 2 Poe Awards, American Mystery Awards, and then he got awards for the Writers Guild. He got a video cassette when video cassette rentals just became big. When Demon with a Glass Hand came out on VHS back in the day,
The Outer Limits.
it became one of the most rented VHS tapes, and they actually gave him the most memorable TV script award for that.
I don't think that's a
Who
real
gave
award.
him that award, though? The VHS company?
Did you ever see that movie, The Last Movie Star with Burt Reynolds? Those folks.
Okay.
The Nova Award, the Penn International Silver Pen Award,
I don't think so.
In other words, this man had no room on his shelf.
the Milford Award, the National Women
For the
Committee,
galleon of milk.
the National Women's Committee
Laugh, bitch!
Award, the Spotlight Award, the Audie Award in 1999 for narration of City of Darkness, and he also won Emmys. Most notably, he won an Emmy for voicing the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland, an audiobook. And then he also won a Grammy nomination for spoken word recording for his adaptation of his own work, Jeff T is 5. So we're talking Grammy Award winning horror.
Did he win an
mystery. all of that stuff. Nobody
He
made a
wrote
movie called
The
Oscar
Oscar.
about the Oscars that he himself hated.
Yep.
And the story behind that we can get into later. But anyway, I just wanted to get it out. So if you've never heard of
You
Harlan
don't think
Ellison,
you should do that on this show?
if you've never heard of Harlan Ellison, but you watched our 3 Stephen King episodes, or 4, or
There's
however many,
four,
how
sir.
many god-awful abominations that we made. This will probably be the only
4.
one I get for Harlan. But
In all fairness,
Stephen King quoted, and did actually, Dance Macabre talks about him. Neil Gaiman, in his A View from the Cheap Seats, talks about Harlan.
Did Harlan ever say anything about Stephen King? Just out of
Yes.
curiosity. And
Yes.
he was not a fan, I'm going to guess.
No,
I don't think they had a
they got
problem.
along.
He one of the better Twilight Zone episodes is actually from the '80s. I don't know how James wants to go about this.
Shadow-
throughout his career.
I mean,
Huh?
You talking about Saturday?
No, not Saturday another good one.
Paladin
But
of the Lost Hour.
it's not the one. It's the grandmother, the boy and his grandmother. It's in the other room. Who's a witch? That's based on a Stephen King short story, actually, and he adapted it. So
Okay.
Um,
So where do we begin talking? Do we start from the beginning?
So how did you find out about Harlan Ellison?
that's actually, and I have it, all these
my
books
God,
on the table.
It's like I set him up, knock him down. That's right, bitch.
This is Approaching Oblivion. If you ask Harlan Ellison fans to name their favorite book, I'm probably the only one that's going to go, oh my God, Approaching Oblivion. The reason it's my favorite, and this is a worn copy, I have a nice copy that somebody bought me that is an original first edition with the dust jacket on. It's cool. It's great. It's on the shelf. I like this one better. Because this has been
Orange.
worn and beat.
I've been worn and beat.
Much like anybody who was around Harlan Ellison.
James has been beat by Harlan.
Which we'll get to
I
that
have.
story. We'll get to
I
that
have.
story.
I'm sorry.
But
Spoiler alert.
Harlan Ellison, so this is how I discovered him. I was in middle school, about 12 years old. And
I was 12 years old reading It.
No, yeah, but that at least was pop. Yeah, Haley's all excited about it.
Yeah.
but 12 years old.
Put your top back on, Haley. Nah, I'm joking. Leave it on.
12 years old, and somebody knew I liked science fiction, and I wasn't the most popular kid in my school by any means.
No,
Shocker, I know.
really.
But I liked Edgar Allan Poe, but I had read just about
Oddly
everything
enough,
Edgar Allan Poe.
Shocker, you
Joe at
said.
that age, still a dick. Continue on with your story.
Yep.
I like Star Trek. Ellison did write an episode of Star Trek. But I went into my library. I was having a pretty crappy day at the library at my middle school. And for some reason, and if you read this book, whoever thought, you know what that middle school library needs? This book. It was on the shelf. And somebody's like, oh, if you like science fiction, you really should read Harlan Ellison.
Who said it to you?
It was the librarian. Who
It
I'm
was a
sure,
witch.
quite frankly, probably has passed away by now. If not, I'm sorry. If you're watching this, subscribe. But
Yeah, you insensitive bitch.
but
You knocked it over.
just kick over whatever you want.
Watch my ass bobblehead.
Anyway, and I read this, and I was 12, and usually 12-year-olds don't read the introduction. But for some reason on this one I did, and it stuck with me, and it literally, that was when I became a Harlan Ellison fan, just the introduction itself. This is not one of his better-known collection. The stories that it contain aren't the ones that most people know. The full title of the book is Approaching Oblivion, Road Signs on the Treadmill Toward Tomorrow. It introduced by Michael Crichton, and Michael Crichton, to tell you what sort of
Is
person...
it Crichton or Crichton?
Crichton,
I always
whatever.
pronounce it Crichton.
However it's pronounced, doesn't matter.
Who is this Cretan you speak of?
He wrote ER.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, something about dinosaurs.
Didn't do
And,
anything else about any
Just
Jurassic World,
dinosaurs at King's Island or something. I don't
Yeah.
know. I didn't watch it.
Westworld. He ripped himself off.
the great. So Michael Crichton, Jurassic Park. Oh my God.
Westworld.
Eaters of the Dead, Disclosure,
Westworld.
The Great Train Robbery,
Westworld.
Westworld, The Andromeda Strain. The man's wrote a ton of great books
And I'll just I want to read the beginning of his
that I actually
introduction,
have read.
because he did the
Good for
introduction
you.
for this in 1974.
Ooh.
Is when this book came out.
One more, The Terminal Man. Great book.
So I read this.
never read that.
I was 12, so it would have been 1992. This book came out in 74. I'm reading it 18 years after the fact. But here's his introduction.
Both are dead, by the way. Should someone
Yep.
Yeah, Michael Crichton didn't last as long as Ellison, though.
Nope.
No, and Michael Crichton.
And he had infinitely
unless
more
he's-
money.
Unless he's got, there's some of him trapped in amber, he's gone.
Yeah.
I mean, we could.
He pretty much
Could you imagine a park filled with Michael Crichton?
he pretty much Jurassic Parked himself.
Anyway, this will tell you a
Parked
little bit.
himself.
This will tell you a little bit about how Harlan Ellison was viewed in Hollywood, even in the 70s. Soon after I came to Los Angeles in 1970, I was called by a producer who offered me a job writing a science fiction screenplay. I was tied up with a book at the time. The producer asked me if I could suggest another writer for the
What
project.
kind of rope do you think the book used?
I suggested Harlan Ellison. There was a long, chilly silence at the other end of the phone. Finally, the producer cleared his throat and said, Do you know Harlan Ellison? No, I said, I didn't. I knew him only through his work. I had read some of his stories and seen some of his television script. The producer said, well, let me tell you something. And he launched into a short, energetic, and wholly unprintable description of his feelings on the subject of one Harlan Ellison. And that's how Harlan Ellison was viewed in the 70s. There's a lot of weird stuff
Getting
about
any better.
There's a lot of stuff that was going on in the 70s with Ellison, though. It is true. When Reagan was governor of California, he wiretapped him. He thought he was a threat.
He was a vehement. He hated Reagan.
He hated Reagan.
He thought Reagan destroyed the education system in California.
And he kind of did.
And he kind of did.
I mean, if you're an educational historian and you're wondering why so many students are drowning in student debt,
It's Reagan.
it's Reagan.
It's Ronald Reagan.
You can't. I mean, and I'm not saying I'm anti-Reagan on all
No,
things, but
but
on education.
Don't get me wrong, he had a lot of help, but it's spearheaded by Ronald Reagan. And if you don't like your HMO, blame Nixon.
Yeah.
Right?
Um,
And if you hate the EPA, you know who else you need to blame? Nixon. Keep going.
Yep. So a lot of the stuff that came out, but he was always a loud voice.
Yes.
And he was always known for being. We talked about him marching. I mean, he marched with MLK. He did all of that stuff. He believes in equality to the fullest extent possible. So he's great in that way. But that also meant that he got on a lot of people's radar in the 50s and 60s and 70s for being, quote unquote, a communist, a socialist, of which I don't think he really fell into any of those because he was also a very good capitalist.
Well, he's very much a capitalist. I think he was a capitalist before anything else. Just like, I would think that's something that he and the Boneheads probably have in common is that he's first a capitalist and everything else second, just like every other red-blooded American.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. But I think if you also go back and if
Coined the
you
term
know,
pay the rider. Keep
Yeah.
going.
if you know his history, it also makes sense. Ellison grew up in Painesville, Ohio,
Mm-hmm.
as he puts it, the town Jew. His father passed away very early in his life, and that left a void that never got filled. He was known to run away from home, but he also, if you go and you read a lot of his fiction, you're going to find the name of a lot of the kids that bullied him, because he always turned them into the villains of his books.
There was like one story where like the town bully came up and called him a derogatory term for a Jewish person that I won't say, and Harlan stood his ground, but Harlan got obliterated.
Yeah, and
Harlan got beat up a lot.
And that was one of the things that he tells
He's
the
a
story.
short man and a short child.
He was
Yes.
5'5" when he was grown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he tells the story about going home after that incident, and his mother's words to him were, because they didn't have a lot of money,
Mm-hmm.
and his clothes were dirty and torn and all that stuff. And he said the thing that hurt him the most was she said, "Well, you must have said something to start it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was Jewish, and the kids especially, didn't understand that. And so Harlan Ellison was shaped largely by comic books and Robin Hood and the fiction of the day. And one of the things that he says, one of the quotes that I love by him is, "I always viewed myself as, Zorro, and I forget the other name they uses." And he goes, "The problem is everybody else viewed me as Porky Pig." Somebody that they could just do whatever they wanted to. And so I think that, Harlan Ellison wrote a lot of fiction, but if you go back and think about his childhood, it wasn't easy, I'm sure, in the 1940s, with everything that was going on in the world, to be the one Jewish person in a rural town
In Ohio, yeah.
when you had people that were coming back, when you had people that were having all of these issues. So I think a lot of Harlan Ellison's stories, I mean, he talks about reading very, very early on, and it was escapism.
Mm-hmm.
And he read comic books. As a matter of fact, he talks about comic books he defended literally till the day he died as much as he could, because anytime anybody would say anything bad about them, he would be like, no, this is of equal writing to anything else. It just depends on what you need at that time.
Yeah. Well, and there's a story which was made into a very good, the 80s Twilight Zone. I don't know where you want to go bounce back and forth. And
I think we have to bounce, because I think
there's too much to cover,
yeah,
I'm going to bounce a little bit to the 80s Twilight Zone. There was a revival of and some of you, if you're of the right age, you may have watched it. I have.
And if you're of the younger age and you watched the other revival with Forrest Whitaker,
not as good.
No, but I mean that was another one that was done in the late 90s, early
2000s. 2000s, yeah. So back to the Twilight Zone. It was produced by Phil DeGuire. Phil DeGuire was famous for producing a show called Simon and Simon. Some of you are going to be too young; you're not going to know what that is, but. He went on to do The Twilight Zone, which is a revival. CBS had huge plans for it. They put a ton of money behind it. They got basically control of everything they want to do. So if you're of a right age and you go, well, a lot of those suck. What it is you're not remembering. I'll tell you a little bit of the story. You're remembering the ones that were shot in Canada later to fill a contract. So what happened is they did a years-long season, basically. And they could do them any length they wanted to do, so they just fill an hour of different. So they could have one that was 30, 45 minutes long, one that was 10 minutes long. Different directors. Wes Craven directed a lot of them. If you're a Tommy Lee Wallace fan, Halloween 3, he directed several of them. Or actually, William Friedkin directed the most powerful, or maybe the most terrifying one, and who directed The Exorcist. They were all set up. Bruce Willis is in one. He's in the one Shatterday, which is based on one of Harlan Ellison's famous stories. So they shot, basically, got a year's season. They finally released it. First one went out great. Second one out. Then they moved the time slot. And that one thing that they requested was that the show be on at 10 o'clock at night. Well, they premiered it at when? 8 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Have you watched any of them? Have you watched any of them lately?
Not lately.
Even for the 80s. Some of them are, I don't know that you'd want them on at 8 p.m. I don't know that you and the rest of the family are ready to watch, what's the William Friedkin one called? It's called Nightcrawlers. And it's about a vet who has special powers from Vietnam and who's remembering this. I mean, it is violent. It is huge. And you're flipping in at the same time that Punky Brewster and Webster is on.
Yeah.
That is not what you're flipping to with the rest of the family. Yeah. That is not TGIF Friday. So the producer, Phil DeGuire, said the third episode or fourth episode had Nightcrawlers, the freaking one on it. They moved it again, and you watch that and you go, oh, we're done.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? They ended up finishing it. Harlan was the story editor for the whole show, correct?
He leave?
He left after the first season because of
They wanted him to edit something.
I can't remember. It was somebody's script or something. He refused to do it.
That goes along with his character we'll talk about.
Yeah. He was making a lot of money, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a week. Because you got to remember, in the 80s, there were only 3 networks.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you worked for one, Wes Craven, if you listen to the commentaries on some, if you haven't, Wes Craven was talking about, he'd already made Nightmare on Elm Street. He'd already made Swamp Thing. These are all low-budget films. He never really had a budget till he worked on Twilight Zone for CBS.
Right.
Which was amazing to me, going, oh my God, he made movies. Didn't have anywhere near the money or the resources that he did just working on the Twilight Zone for TV. And he was talking about how nice it was. So what happened was the CBS basically got another half season out of it and then yanked it. Well, they had contractually already set aside, or they made contracts with all the for syndication. So they actually finished a whole other third season so they could get 100 or whatever episodes it is, or whatever how many episodes they need. I don't think it was a full 100, so they could do syndication. They finished all the way in Canada later on, a couple of years later, I think in 89. And actually JMS, John Michael Straczynski, actually did a lot of those and wrote a lot of those. They didn't have anywhere near the money. They're basically 22, 24 minutes. Not as good.
Yep.
So, I forgot where I was going with all that.
Well, I mean, Ellison was.
You had me captivated.
So one of the best episodes is Paladin of the Lost Hour. No,
Jeff D is 5.
which one is the one he goes back home to? He's a child.
Is it called Back Home?
No.
No.
I know what it is.
Oh shit. Sorry.
No, that's not a name of an episode in the 80s.
No.
Wouldn't get by censors.
Surrounded by blah blah blah. It's one of those titles.
Yeah, it's. Thank God he was good at titles.
I mean, basically what it is it's a story back to Ellison's childhood of a writer who accidentally or gets to go back in time and talk to his young self, and the whole time he thought his life went sideways because he was mad at his father. And what happens is he watches his young angry self and his father having a hard time trying to control this very rambunctious boy who would have been like Harlan, he would have been given medication for ADD. He had, I'm sure, a host of other issues. Agreed?
Well, and Harlan, not long before, I mean, shortly after we got to meet Harlan was diagnosed as, not overly shockingly, having depression and anxiety issues.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he didn't just suddenly develop those in his 70s.
I'm sure he had them as a child. He's probably a horrible child. And this writer...
In a horrible situation.
This writer befriends this child and ends up breaking this child's heart, and that's what actually sends the child off into all these problems. Yeah. And he did it to himself. Yeah. And it's a metaphor for...
I was going to say. See that? He did it to him.
It's a really good episode.
It is. Okay. And it's...
that reminds me a lot of Bruce Willis's The Kid.
Yeah, but that came out way later.
Yeah.
Remember what we were talking about?
Not as good.
And remember when we were talking about ripped off? That man got ripped off several times.
Yeah, and he let everybody know that he was ripped off.
Chad, do you want to tell one of those amazing stories about him pissing somebody off that you've been watching about?
Well, so he was a frequent contributor of Tom Snyder. Tom Snyder had him on his talk show all the time. If you don't know who Tom Snyder is, Tom Snyder...
I haven't done the Eat the Bullet line in a long time because I was told that it was offensive.
No,
but eat a bullet.
No. So Tom Snyder, he had a talk show. It was called Tomorrow back in the 70s.
Yeah. He had several talk shows.
He had several talk shows. I mean, the man was constantly doing talk shows. And he eventually became David Letterman's...
After Letterman.
After Letterman.
Handpicked by Letterman.
Handpicked by Letterman, for obvious reasons. But one episode, it was like when I started doing my research on Ellison, because I don't have the connection to Ellison that you guys have. I know some of his work in terms of TV and film, but I haven't read books.
Yeah.
I knew of him, but I started doing research, and the first thing I found was an episode of Tomorrow with Tom Snyder that was with the cast, was some of the members of Star Trek.
I've seen that one. You can watch it on YouTube.
You can watch it on YouTube. James Doohan, Chekhov,
Walter Koenig,
and DeForest Kelley. Now the first 20 minutes is just Doohan, Kelly, and Chekhov. I can't ever say his name.
Walter Koenig.
Just reminiscing about Star Trek and how wonderful it was. And this is one thing that creeped me out was they were actually talking about like schematics of the ship and how they were actually in this part of this ship and this is how this ran. And I just kept going. It was 3 sets. It's not a real ship. Let it go.
Some of our audience members may be upset now. Thank you, Chad.
Fine. I love Star Trek. I just didn't understand that mentality of talking about the show in that way. And then here comes Harlan Ellison to basically say Star Trek is crap. It was a glossed over fantasy of how everything is perfect when it shouldn't be perfect. James, to help me out if I misquote anything. No. And then there's a great interaction between, and this is one thing I got excited about. And I said, James, have you seen this? He said, of course I've seen it.
I've seen it too.
James Doohan and Harlan Ellison getting into it because Harlan Ellison called Star Trek a cop show. And James Doohan said it was not a cop show. And Harlan refused to relent. To the point of where you could see James Doohan gnawing at the bit that he wanted to reach over and grab Ellison and tell him this is not a cop show. But he said all it was. He said basically all Star Trek was a redone cop show, which there was a ton of at the time, and there's a ton of to this day.
And in all honesty, I can see both sides of the issue because, especially if you look, you got to remember, kids, this is when the original series was it.
Yeah.
There was no Next Generation. There were no shades of gray. The Federation never went in and went, whoa. Turns out we're wrong. Our bad.
Yeah.
There were no other science fiction shows for the most part.
No.
There was that and Lost in Space and what else?
Well, when was Outer Limits and Twilight Zone?
That would have been it. And they would have both been off by the time Star Trek came on.
That's true.
But as far as trying to have
so would have Thriller. Thriller would have been
Yeah.
off by then too. Of course, Thriller had much more of a horror bit. So.
Yeah, it was a horror.
But I think if you look at it and think about the ongoing, I mean, as far as having, and those were anthologies basically.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't a consistent cast.
No.
They weren't consistent. So Lost in Space and Star Trek having that consistent. But to Ellison's credit, I mean, the Federation was always right. There was never any really shades of gray on that show.
They didn't really get shades of gray up until Roddenberry died, and they were able to get rid of. Let's be honest, the movies.
Yeah.
And that was because they basically pushed Roddenberry out of that.
Yeah.
And
Watch
then,
Panic on the Bridge.
Yeah, a really great documentary. And then once Roddenberry started to get sick, or was kind of pushed away from that and kind of lose control.
And
really, the
arguably,
shades of gray to me didn't really even come in for the most part for me till
Deep Space Nine.
Deep Space Nine.
And they have escalated now with Star Trek Discovery, where they actually fight.
Yes.
Where you actually see Starfleet officers saying, "No, you're wrong. No, this is wrong." So that changed. But no, and that's so in that way, the Federation was the law, and the law was always right. It was a cop show.
Yes.
I can also see though.
It's not a cop show.
James Doohan saying, "Okay, the cop show at the time was what, Dragnet?
Let's use Dragnet.
It's not Dragnet."
Yeah, they were using obscure shows I'd never heard of at the time.
Adam 12.
No, it wasn't Adam 12. Harlan, he spouted out a couple that were on air. This was a 1975-76 interview.
So this would have been before they ever
Yeah.
did the motion picture or any of that.
And he even said, he was ripping on people who went to the Star Trek conventions at that time. And the guy who created the Star Trek convention was right there. And they go, "Well, why do you go?" "I go for the money.
Oh,
If some idiot's willing to pay me for my signature, I'm going to get that money."
And you know
That
what's
was
funny?
Because he's a
capitalist. But you know the other side of that is
John Carpenter has the same thing.
Yeah. Well, the other side of that though is if you read, and I don't have it up here, but his original script for Star Trek: The City on the Edge of Forever, which is not what I got.
By the way, Harlan Ellison wrote what a lot of people consider
TV Guide.
Let's bounce back a little bit and say Harlan Ellison wrote maybe what a lot of people consider probably one of my favorite two, City on the Edge of Forever, and it's the one that people always remember, or one of the ones. that people
And
always
for our
remember.
listeners who know just a little bit of Star Trek,
please.
what is somebody give
Okay, so City on the Edge of Forever,
The
basically,
short version, Jay.
Yes, basically McCoy. They're around this planet.
Notice I was looking at you to give this description.
See, I'd be done now if you'd stop talking. They're around this planet where they're getting weird temporal waves. McCoy accidentally injects himself with some stuff that makes him go crazy. He jumps through time. He ends up in Depression-era America, where he is saved by Edith Keeler, who is going to...
White trash Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah, anyway.
Why is it Elizabeth Taylor white trash Elizabeth
Because
Taylor?
this lady is... Dynasty's lady is obviously white trash
Joan
Elizabeth
Crawford. Joan Crawford. Her name
This
is Joan
is a
Crawford.
callback. That is not Joan Crawford.
Joan Crawford
is
the white man shrimp.
The white man.
I'm gonna go ahead
You know
and
what I'm
screwed it
referring
up.
to.
Anyway. Point being, they go down, they find the Guardian of Forever, which is this portal through time. They jump back. It talks, and it says basically, I've been here since the beginning, I'll be here through the end, and I will always be. They realize that they can use it to get McCoy back. They travel back, or at first they're going to radio the ship. They contact the ship, and the ship's not there anymore. And they find out that because something McCoy did in the past reset history.
Yeah, well,
He
they
saved
don't know.
white trash Elizabeth Taylor. I
Well,
love
they don't-
callbacks.
They don't know what it is. Finally, they get back, and they basically, they don't have jobs, obviously. They have to deal with capitalism. They have to deal with all that stuff.
And the fact that Spock's ears.
Spock's ears, which are caused by a unfortunate accident with a rice picker. It's a true line. Look it up.
I know. I've seen the show.
He, they find out that
You
basically
always preferred
McCoy...
Space 1999.
Yeah, Space 1999 with your... Martin Landau's your...
Martin Landau is the white man shrimp.
First off, everybody knows who's a true
It's
sci-fi.
Wendy.
No, everybody knows that Buck Rogers is the best science fiction show ever.
That's the white
I'm
man
gonna get
shrimp.
to this. I'm gonna get to that in a second. But anyway, turns out McCoy, when he jumped back and sobered up a little bit, he saved Edith Keeler, who Kirk has fallen in love with by this point in the story when they realize it, and Spock has to deliver the line, "She must die."
By the way, if he would have ran into Elizabeth Taylor, he would have gladly
So
thrown her
she's
from the
running
car.
like a homeless shelter.
She's running
She's
a
a very
homeless
kind
shelter.
person.
She's helping all these
What
homeless
happens
people.
is, as she lives, she starts a wave of
Peace movement, which delays America's
involvement in World War II, which causes a host of problems.
which eventually we lose.
Yeah.
Which is why the Enterprise wasn't there. They're trapped in this time, so they have to stop
Because
her.
America's got to conquer the stars, the wagon train to the stars, if you will.
And what the story ends with,
Those poor horses didn't do too good in space.
They didn't do good at all.
they finally catch
The
up with
horse's
McCoy.
eyeballs are on his face.
They finally catch up with McCoy, and however you feel about William Shatner's acting, it is one of the most heart-wrenching scenes because it is Kirk who grabs McCoy and stops him, and McCoy has the line, "I could have saved her. You don't know what you've done, Jim." And Shatner never speaks, Kirk never speaks, and Shatner Leonard Nimoy as Spock goes, "Oh, he knows, Doctor. He knows."
So they let her die.
Yes.
That fixes time. They go back in time. Now, why? That's a great episode. That's a good story. That's not the way originally Harlan wrote it. He was rewritten by whom?
He's rewritten by Gene Roddenberry, and by a couple other people had to take a crack at that script.
Gene Roddenberry. Who did he hate till the day Gene Roddenberry died?
Oh, he hated him after he died, and that's what I was going to say. So, if you ever get a chance to read the script, a couple different things are different. He thought McCoy accidentally injecting himself with his own drugs was stupid, because no doctor would do that. The original reason they end up on the planet is that they actually have to, for the first time in a long time, have to initiate the death penalty, which the Federation doesn't deal with. And that's one of the reasons Roddenberry didn't like it. He said, we don't need to go that dark. And to Ellison, who was a teetotaler, the one punishment would be if you deal drugs, the Federation will get rid of you. And his logic, that makes sense. You have a non-interference agreement. You're not going to let somebody deal drugs to another planet. And however... so they catch somebody, and the punishment for that is not death, actually. It's being marooned. So they find
a maroon.
They find this planet to
right.
maroon this ensign on. Ensign Ricky, I don't know. His name
Doesn't matter. Go quicker.
Beams them down. It turns out the abandoned planet, it has the Guardians of Forever, which is not a big circular sphere. They're beings.
Mm-hmm.
And they misread his script and saw runes, and as Ellison put it, didn't bother to... They thought he misspelled it, R-U-N-E-S. They thought he meant ruins, and they just changed the word.
And now the other thing too, since we brought this up, what is in Harlan Ellison's opinion, what is the one thing you cannot do with anything that he creates?
Oh, you can't change it.
You cannot change it. Anything Harlan Ellison creates, you do not touch. That's the way it's supposed to go.
That's it.
So anyway, he beams down to the planet. The Guardians send him back, and he screws up time, and then they have to go back and stop him.
Which, by the way, at the same time, too, because he hated Roddenberry so much for doing that to his script, Harlan Ellison worked on the first Star Trek movie, right?
He
was
pitched it.
approached.
He was pitched it.
approached.
Have you ever heard the pitch?
No, he didn't tell the interview. He mentioned that he was working with Roddenberry on the movie. He never heard about it. I never heard about the pitch.
I can actually tell you the pitch. James, do you know the pitch?
I do. Go ahead, though.
What do you want to finish?
Well, real quick. So what happens is they do back... That's kind of the same, but the ending's a little bit different. Instead of McCoy jumping to save her, because McCoy is going back with them to save them, instead of that, what ends up happening is she's not going to get... She's already been saved, and they have to find a way to kill her, and it's Spock that pushes her out in front of the truck.
Yeah, so they murder her.
And
Which was a way better ending.
And the logic is the reason it has to...
It doesn't bother me as bad as it did Ellison, but yeah, I didn't mind it either.
Kirk wants to... Kirk knows he's supposed to do it, but Spock realizes he's not going to be able to, because Kirk hesitates, and Spock walks over and just shoves her.
Yeah.
And it's logical. He would be... It's supposed to drive. And so they had all these back and forth, and one of the things that did make it worse was Roddenberry... when he said why he changed it, because Ellison told people he changed my script. He wanted his name removed from it. Ellison was a big deal at the time, and I'll get into that later. But he flew off the handle. I want Cordwainer. What was it? Cordwainer Bird, which basically means making shoes for birds. That was his pen name when he got angry. He said, "I want that on there." They wouldn't do it, and Gene Roddenberry, as conventions started to go on, and Ellison was speaking at conventions, Roddenberry started getting up going, well, I had to change the script. He had Scotty dealing drugs, and he had all this stuff, and Scotty wouldn't deal drugs. None of which was true.
Right.
And that just drove the weight between them. And if you read White Wolf Publishing put out a version of
Ellison script,
and it has an introduction by Leonard Nimoy, an introduction by, these things setting up here's what actually happened and all that stuff. Walter Koenig, William Shatner even did one. The funny part about it is that Harlan Ellison has his own thing, and he actually begins it with, "They say to speak no ill of the dead." Oh, I did it slightly. Sorry, Harlan. F that. Let me tell you why he deserves everything he got.
Yeah.
And he proceeds to go through, and he actually talks about how he treated D.C. Fontana and how he didn't like it when people not only messed with his stuff, but if you screwed with writers, he didn't like you.
Right.
So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah.
The pitch he did.
So Roddenberry was trying his best. There was a little movie that came along. So for years he was trying to get Star Trek 2, or Phase 2, right?
Phase 2 was going to be a TV series.
It was going to be a TV series.
Was originally going to launch a fourth network called the Paramount Network.
Which is now an actual network.
Yeah. So they tried their best. That kept falling through. He tried to get a movie off the ground because Star Trek was still huge in syndication.
And according to some people, Roddenberry was doing these conventions. He would get up on stage to wild applause. And, "Oh, we're bringing it back. You just..." And half the time there was no actual plans to do that. I mean, he was hopeful because he wanted
money. Yeah, he was a capitalist too. That was the one thing they both had in common. So they tried to pitch, and then there was a little movie that came about. What was that movie?
Battlestar Galactica, it turns out.
Star Wars.
Huge
And Paramount looks around and goes, "Well, Jesus, we need a Star Wars. What do we got?" They had Star Trek. And one of the pitches was from, they kept pitching, nothing was big enough. They brought in Harlan. And Harlan's is as a go to the end of the galaxy, basically. Am I right, James?
Yeah.
And they find a wall. And they set phasers to sassy or whatever, and they shoot a hole in the wall, correct?
Yep.
And is God on the other side? Is that what it is?
A god. Like, however you want to...
Right.
Yeah.
So he pitches this to all the execs, and
yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah, because... And now...
Which is a great idea. I don't know how you end it.
What's funny about that... Well, and that was the thing. I think the ending that he had in mind, if I remember correctly, was they basically meet God, and God says, effectively, for all intents and purposes, I'm still here, but you have outgrown me.
Yeah.
You now have all this stuff.
Harlan was a lifelong atheist.
Yeah.
Not an agnostic.
No. The only time
Card-carrying atheist.
The only time he showed up as somewhat agnostic is, and it's very rarely in public, but there are a few clips of him where he talks about his frustrations with religion. And in those moments, there's a couple of them where you can see, arguably he has some faith, but he won't give up his faith in people for that.
Yeah. Anyway, that was one of the pitches. Of course, they didn't do it. Harlan is known for hitting executives. Harlan was known for screaming. Harlan was also known for, I don't like the word womanizing because I don't think it's accurate for a lot of people who are just slutty.
No, I was about to say, and I don't.
I think that's a negative term. I don't know that that's womanizing because I meet women and men who are slutty. I mean it. So I don't know that slutty.
Mario?
Slutty is not a bad term for me.
Well, no, I was about to say, I don't
often
think...
liked people who were slightly slutty.
I don't think, though, and this is why I wouldn't say Harlan Ellison was a womanizer, because one of the, like I said, he was equal opportunity in many, many different ways. I don't think he didn't Weinstein anybody.
No, it's nothing like that. But he dated a lot of the starlets of the time.
Yes.
And bedded a lot of people at the time.
Yes.
He was
never anyone, though, against their will. That's what I wanted. Before anybody was like, "Oh, Ellison."
He's just known for being a lover around.
Robin Williams does a little song about him, about how everybody loves the Jew.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
absolutely. Robin Williams said he got more kitty than a letterbox.
Yeah.
Something to that. If you watch another great documentary about Harlan called
Dreams with Sharp Teeth.
So back to what we were saying, he was famous for that. He was famous for also writing one of the best Outer Limits episode, which was the Demon with Glass Hand.
Yes.
Right?
And Demon with the Glass Hand, the basic plot to it is Robert Culp, who he wrote the role for.
I don't know that I knew that.
It's written for him. As a matter of fact, it's a true story. Robert Culp says it in an interview. You can go back and watch this. It's online, I'm sure. That he said, I'd never met Harlan before. I walk on the set the first day, and there's this guy walking around doing this and checking everything to make sure. And he goes, I think for a second maybe he works, maybe he's a set designer, maybe he's working on the set. And then he looks over and he sees me and he goes, I wrote this for you. What do you think about that? And he goes, of course, well, I'm honored. This is great. It's a great script. But Demon with the Glass Hand is about a man, arguably, sent back in time, and he doesn't remember things clearly. He's having issues, and he's got a hand that's glass. It looks glass. It's kind of see-through, and he wears a glove over it, but it's missing fingers. And he appears, and all of a sudden these other people, start showing up to kill him. And he's being chased, and he can't remember, and then he finds one of the fingers effectively, and he plugs it in, and he gets a little bit of his memory back, and this woman's trying to help him, and it's all this stuff, and they're trying to fight and survive. And when he finally completes the hand, he finds out he's not human. He finds out that he is a robot that was sent backwards through time. You're going to find out later about how this affects a certain James Cameron movie. He was a robot that was sent back in time to preserve humanity, and all of humanity has been encoded on a single wire that's hiding inside him. And his one thing is he has to live because that's the only way to preserve humanity. And he will be hunted.
So later on, there was a guy named James Cameron. And he hooked up with this lady named, I can't remember her, of all the ladies, James Cameron hooked up with a lot of ladies. Oh, the producer of the Terminator and Aliens. He was his wife at the time.
No,
not Catherine Bigelow.
I was going to say Linda Hamilton, but it's not Linda
And not Linda Hamilton. That's another one. We
Yeah.
named two of the other
we
wives.
named two of the other ones.
So anyway, there was a movie, you guys might have saw it, had Schwarzenegger in it. Have you guys ever seen it? He goes back in time to kill Sarah Connor.
Eraser?
Yeah, that's it. Eraser. So End of Days is basically...
Soldier.
Did you like Junior?
Oh, man, Red Dawn.
Soldier was another one, but real quick, that also was an Outer Limits episode that also, quote-unquote, may have influenced.
So he threw up a fit when Terminator came out, and it wasn't on the original release, but it's on the video cassettes and everything further.
And it's in Terminator 2. He gets the credit there, too.
Yeah, that it says, inspired by the writings of Harlan Ellison. Actually, he didn't necessarily want money for that. He wanted credit, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true.
I don't think Cameron paid him, not to my knowledge.
They did end up settling out of court, and he got credit. And I think I read somewhere that the studio actually said we need to grease the wheels.
Yeah.
I don't know what that meant, but I do think there was a partially financial. But no, you're right. That was not Harlan's intent. Once
He
again,
wanted credit.
Give me credit.
Give credit. Always give the writer credit.
Credit. I mean, it goes
Always give
back to
credit.
the thing that made him the maddest. Don't give the writer credit, and I will come after you.
So we've talked about several different things. Should we tell the story of how you met Harlan Ellison?
Well, I want to say
Because
real
we're
quick.
at minute 50.
I know. But I want to say a couple different things about him. One thing that Harlan Ellison's really important for writers is that story is an indicator of. In the early days of the internet, back when there was this thing called AOL.
You mean back when Al Gore created it?
Yeah. Shortly after Al
And
Gore...
you get these discs in the mail.
And
you
Al Gore's
throw them
sending
at your
those damn
friends.
discs.
Yeah, and they were putting that series of tubes together still. And you put your disc down in the tube with, I think. Anyway, AOL was the biggest company on the planet
stood for
at the
Al's
time.
Oblivion lasers. Nobody knew that they were contributing.
They'll try to
That
tell you...
wasn't bad off the top of your head.
I know, thank you.
They'll try to tell you it's American Online, but that's just a Democratic cover-up. Fake news. Fake news.
Fake news! NBC wrote that.
Anyway.
Craig Dennis out there watching, ooh, look, the liberal communist media. I'm on the Today Show.
All true, by the way. Anyway.
All true.
But...
I hope he
was
saw this
known-
episode.
He was known for suing a lot of people. Harlan Ellison sued people if they took his ideas, if they did anything. I mean, filed a suit not too long before he died because Paramount breached the topic of using The City on the Edge of Forever as a basis for one of the new Star Trek movies. And he said, whoa, pay me.
Let me tell I know I don't want to get him off track, but I do gotta tell this
Go
story.
ahead.
Is it about JJ?
No, well, yeah, no, it's about Harlan Ellison. So, what was the book that he wrote? Dangerous
Visions.
Dangerous Visions, and then the sequel.
Again, Dangerous Visions.
And then do you know about the third
I'm
part?
well aware of the third one. That literally there are people that have died waiting for it to come out.
So Harlan Ellison compiled all these stories for part 3 of this amazing series of books, and he never released it. He just kept saying that he was working on it. People would release, and then there was a couple of writers who's like, I need to get this story out. They released it in another format, and he sued them. Meanwhile, never having any intentions of releasing this.
Why did he not want to release it?
He just kept coming up with excuses, right?
The thing about it was as an editor, and he was an award-winning editor too. People kind of forget that he edited. I mean, he did it all. But the thing about it was he, oddly enough, had that perfectionist mentality, and he kept looking for the story. And if you hear his arguments about it, when he talks about Dangerous Visions, he's like, I knew I had to complete whatever that was at the time.
Yeah.
And with, again, Dangerous Vision, he said, I got 2 or 3 stories, and I'm like, oh, we're representing this and this, which we haven't seen in science fiction before. He said by the time it got to the third one, and he had, by the way, 400 different excuses, but the one that he used the most often was he never felt it was there.
Yeah.
Like he was still missing a story to deal with X or Y or Z. So,
and now, as of now, he's gone. That storybook will, there were so many great writers who contributed to this novel that never got released, and we're probably never going to see it because as of 2010, there's an interview with him who said that he instructed his wife upon his death, any unreleased manuscripts, she is to burn.
Burn.
I knew that, yeah.
That is something that we will probably never see unless she really hated him, which there's a likelihood.
No,
I've met her. She's a nice woman.
Well, and I think the other part about that is
she's up for sainthood like Mandy Dennis.
That
See, yeah. I did my homework for this episode.
For you.
I think though the
never say I'm not a good friend, you jackass.
I wish you'd went on with some alliteration
thank you,
there.
Jerk face.
Went all Dr. Smith on you, cluttering, clinking, clit.
Well, Harlan's word of the one thing that in my research.
Are you going to do the word he invented?
I don't know, but this is one word that I kept hearing that bugged the ever-loving piss out of me. Chittering. I cannot stand hearing that word one more damn time. I don't know. I just hate that word. Every time he said it, chittering, it just drove spikes in my ears.
Fuck.
Yeah, that's the word.
The term bug fuck.
Yeah, anytime anything went sideways, it was no longer sideways.
It was a bug fuck.
No, chittering. He just said chittering, and he used it 3 times, I believe, in "I have no mouth, I want to scream,"
which is another great story.
I must scream. Sorry.
I will.
I listened to it. I listened to it today. Listen to Harlan Ellison reading it. He said chittering 3 times. Go ahead with your stories. I'm sorry.
So, going back to AOL when it first came out,
Al's Oblivion Lasers
didn't care much about copyright laws, and Harlan Ellison and a bunch of other writers that were big at the time, I think Stephen King was another one, they would put a book out, and literally within 2 days, somebody would just be like, oh, I typed up the entire book, here it is, you can get it for free, violating copyright laws. And the internet was kind of a wild, wild west at the time, and you had these people that were like, well, it's the internet, you won't be able to track me down. And Harlan Ellison basically hired what would be at the time hackers and all these people and went find them. And he, as he put it, he goes, these kids would be hiding out in, Wisconsin or lower Islip or what, and I'd find them. And I'd be like, now pay me. And then when that went side, they started to be like, well, it's not our fault. Blah, blah. He said, fine, it's AOL's fault. They're not watching what you do. So if AOL's profiting because you're paying them, I want my cut of AOL. Mm-hmm. And he did that, and he had all the other authors. He got other authors to join him that had been taken advantage of. And really a lot of what affected protections for writers on the internet, again, pay the writer mentality, came from Harlan Ellison and those other writers saying, no, we don't care that this is new technology. You will respect us.
And back to that real quick, and the Boneheads really do say this a lot. We don't say pay the writer. We say pay the artist. Whether that be what we're doing today, whether that
which
be
we're not getting paid for. So if you'd like to sponsor
you, feel free to send us a check. But anyway, So, do you want to tell the story of how you met him?
It's story time with James.
Yeah, and I want to. I want to tell the story, and then I want to read one of my favorite parts out of this.
Never lets me play my music.
So,
let me know when you want me to jump in.
Well, I think.
Don't jump, you might hurt yourself or us.
So.
Because you're quite large.
Harlan Ellison announced several years ago. I guess it would have been what? When was
this would have been 2010 October.
Yes. That he was doing his
Why
last.
do I remember this?
I always can't. I can't remember.
It had been late September, early October.
I think it was late
2010.
September.
Oh,
because
2010.
It was September because it was my anniversary, which is why I was not there.
Oh my God, Chad's not in this story. Cut, Haley, cut!
It was my 1-year anniversary.
And you spent it with your wife like a chump.
And had some strange woman kiss my hand.
Harlan Ellison
We had the
was
same thing.
doing his last big con. And by the way, you can go to, I think, the Shag Records, Deep Shag Records. There's a series. He did recordings because he did conventions from the 1960s till this one in 2010.
It was 2010. I remember it like it was
and you can get On the Road with Ellison, and it's just where they recorded him doing, and so you could actually listen to this con. But he announced it was his last big con. And matter of fact, he made the argument that it was his last big con in multiple ways. That he was a con artist. It was his final way
people
to get money.
paying him, yeah.
But I was like, I can't miss this because up until that point, I actually have it with me. I stuck it in here. So this was my first Harlan Ellison signature.
And describe to the listeners what that is, James.
This is an Outer Limits card. So the Outer Limits, Rittenhouse, I believe. This is Rittenhouse? Yes, maybe? Rittenhouse is an archive. They started as an archive, but they do collector cards and stuff like this. And they started doing these really cool sets. They eventually got the Star Trek contract. Mm-hmm. But they started with Twilight Zone, and then they picked up Outer Limits.
Because it's the card you always want to collect. I got a 60-year-old Jew, look!
I had Dick Tracy collecting cards.
That's how I got this.
Oh, he's a writer.
Did it come with gum?
Because everybody wanted to buy it because Leonard Nimoy was on the Outer Limits, William Shatner, all these big names.
George W. Bush. Prove it.
Prove that he was on it?
Prove that he wasn't.
Would you finish the story so we can get on? This is a long-winded way to get to Madison, Wisconsin.
No. This was my only collectible, though. I had the books, and I saw this online, and the guy that was selling it literally didn't take the time to, at the time, probably Yahoo, who Harlan Ellison was, and he literally put it going, this guy's not an actor, I'm selling this card. That was the eBay listing. And I was like, oh, it's Harlan Ellison. And I was like, I'll never get a chance to meet Harlan. Mm-hmm. This will be the only way I ever get a signature. And the guy wanted... Now, other people were selling this card online because there were only so many of them made because Harlan Ellison didn't sign for a year. I think there were 100 of these mixed in with the entire production series. They were selling for $60, $70. This guy didn't even put Harlan Ellison's name in the title. Just went Outer Limits signed card, and you had to search for it, Harlan Ellison anything.
This story's way too long to get to Madison, Wisconsin.
$7.25. I got my first Harlan Ellison.
Oh my goodness!
Go on with your story.
It'd be funny as fuck if you just started ripping it up. I mean, it'd be horrible.
It would be really sad when I killed him later today.
I
anyway,
giggle slightly.
But so I say all that to say, when I heard he was doing his last con, and it was in Madison, Wisconsin, and I had driven to a friend's wedding that was in Wisconsin, so I was like, hey, I can drive it, I can do it. And I told Joe, hey, Harlan Ellison's doing one big convention in Madison, and Joe, filled with excitement, goes, yeah, we should go. So, as time went on, I think that was about, it's probably about February that I first found out about it. I was like, oh, great.
I tell this part funnier.
And then, Joe, you were so excited.
Here's what happened. You want to go to a con in Madison, Wisconsin? I'm trying my best to get out of a certain job at the University of Kentucky to get into any other job. Sure, James. All right, then. I had a lot of disposable income, free time, no kids. Great. Sure, James. 3 months later, hey, Joe, I got us tickets for your birthday. Tickets to what? To Madison, Wisconsin. What are you talking about? Remember we talked about it 3 months ago. No, I have no clue. Oh, remember I got us tickets. Oh, okay, thanks. 3 months later, Joe, I got us a rent-a-car. Rent-a-car for what?
This is all
We're going to Madison, Wisconsin. What do you mean we're going to Madison, Wisconsin? We're going to go see Harlan Ellison. What are you talking about? Well, we had this conversation twice now. I have no recollection of any of that.
I have emails where I even said, hey, I went and got tickets. Here it is. I had emailed him all the information.
This is your birthday. And for me,
The
I was like, oh,
hotel.
great. I'm getting screwed by James on another birthday.
The hotel and everything.
I got us a hotel. You got us a hotel. Actually, the next one was a hotel, and then it was a rent-a-car. I got us a hotel. Hotel for what, James? Every 3 months until we get there.
Was it a hotel, motel?
No,
Holiday
we actually stayed on site. One of the few times I've ever done that.
Yeah.
Because usually the cons are expensive and we stay someplace else.
Yeah.
So anyway, we go up to Madison,
Back in the day
Wisconsin.
before they started taking care of it, before we stopped paying to go to cons.
Yeah.
We go up to Madison, Wisconsin, have a nice drive up, get the KFC double down, hashtag double down.
Hashtag double down. The thing that he's forgetting is I finally got a job interview for another job. They said, we'd love to interview, and the reason why I remember all the dates vividly is because we would love to interview you for this phone interview. That's great. When would you like to do it this Friday? I can't do it this Friday. Why not? I'm going to be going to Madison, Wisconsin. Well, sir, this is the only day we've got. Get on the phone, start talking to them while James is driving.
We're going
double
down the
downs.
interstate.
We're not holding double downs, but going down the interstate, and the call drops midway through my phone interview. Have to call them back, and I still end up getting an in-person interview out of this. I have no idea how. I looked at James, and James said, it sounded okay to me.
Yeah, that's all true.
And then they called me that afternoon, and I didn't get it back. I didn't even know about it until that next Monday.
We get to Madison, Wisconsin. And it was an absolute blast. Harlan Ellison told us stories.
We stopped at a Chinese place. We'd never been there.
Yeah, we got to experience Madison, Wisconsin. If you ever have a chance,
It actually is a lot of fun. It's a
University
fun town.
of Wisconsin, Madison, Caesar
It's
campus.
beautiful. It's on a
campus.
lake.
The deli.
It's Stella. No, is it Stella?
Eliza?
Ella's Deli. It's one of the best Jewish delis, and it's filled
great.
with old, wind-up,
Toys.
actual metal toys. Actually,
Beautiful. It's cool.
tin
It's
toys.
Cool.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. So we did all of that. I got to meet Harlan Ellison. Now, the backstory on this was Harlan Ellison had posted several years ago. He has a place, the Lost Aztec Temple of Mars is what he called his home. It's in California. It was hit by earthquakes. And he had these Marvel mirrors that you used to get in the 60s and 70s where they took, like, Jack Kirby art and they put it on a mirror and they gave them out at, like, festivals and stuff like that. Well, he had the complete set, and the Spider-Man one fell and broke during an earthquake. And I happened to be on eBay, and I found one. And I was like, I'll take it to him. This will be great. I contacted the guy running the convention. Very nice guy. I said, hey, I found this. Should I bring it up? He said, well, let me run it by Harlan. According to him, he said, I ran it by Harlan. He said, yeah, go ahead and bring it. So that's the backstory on that. So I have this mirror, and I'm getting in line. We're going to... And Harlan Ellison doesn't
a lot of
sit
mean
down.
stuff out.
No, I was going to say, Harlan Ellison does not sit down to sign. So there's this huge line that came to Madison, Wisconsin. Peter David is there. Gene Wolfe, the other science fiction author, great author, is
I forgot
there.
about Gene Wolfe.
And everybody else is sitting
We
down.
talked to Peter David in line for a long time.
Yeah, Peter David's table is right there, so we're standing in line.
There is a great panel discussion on YouTube with Gene Wolfe, Isaac Asimov, and
that's from
Harlan
back when
Ellison.
A&E actually did arts and entertainment stuff.
Actually was Arts and Entertainment.
And yes, I missed that show. It was Nightcap was the name of the show.
Yep.
With Studs Terkel.
Studs Terkel.
Famous oral historian. Anyway.
Continue on.
Look that interview
Wish
up.
my name was Studs.
So
Terkel. I feel like I would have went further.
So we're standing in line.
Joe
We're
Lewis has
talking.
kept me behind.
We're stalking. We're stalking. We're standing in line.
One of us was stalking.
We're standing in line to talk to Harlan Ellison, to get him to sign some stuff. And Harlan Ellison is getting up. Like, he's still never sat down. He's going up and down the aisle, yelling at people, he's doing Harlan Ellison stuff. That's what he's doing.
Bitching that he's getting old. When James is leaving out, he gets up that Friday. This happened on a Saturday. That Friday night, I never met the man. I'm in shorts. I forget that Madison, Wisconsin in late September is not as warm as Lexington, Kentucky. So I froze my balls off for 3 days because all I packed was shorts and short sleeve
I was
shirts.
perfectly comfortable.
Yes. Later on, as the women were screaming at him as we got trapped in Madison, Wisconsin on football day in the middle of all the streets.
Because, Joe, it was indeed game day.
Bitches. Yeah, that's not what she said. But
No,
anyway.
it was worse.
He screams he's dying. He knows he's dying. They pulled him off his deathbed to come do this last con and all these other things. And then the night before, and I'm just sitting here, I'm just loving it because He's
This is
batshit nuts.
Oh yeah.
He says bug fuck. No offense, I know we've said it. I say bad shit. He's batshit nuts.
But so
Nuttier than squirrel shit, as you would say.
So he has never sat down, and there's a line. There's an attorney behind us.
There's an attorney in front of us. You were talking about the one with the drink, who's a nice-looking lady who we've got to know over the weekend.
Because we've stood there.
And who traded bards with I back and forth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
She and I, we got into it over an auction over... Where's it at? That Rolling Stone issue signed by Carrie Fisher of Star Wars. You remember that?
Yeah, it's Carrie. And then did you also get the one signed by Debbie Reynolds?
He threw it in with it. Yeah, we got into it over me winning that auction.
Yes.
So he stops in front of us, and she had been flirting with the owner, and he went and got her a beer while we were standing in line. And she tells Harlan this story, and Harlan says, "That makes you a whore."
Yep.
Right?
Yes. But then my favorite
Her
part
world was made complete by Harlan Ellison calling her a whore. If he would just sit down and sign, he would be done. Or did we run? Which one ran out? Or we still keep going? If he sits down, we'd all be done.
Oh, yeah.
James says the line goes on for the attorney. Really, it's only about 100 people.
It's about 100 people. Because it was a small con.
It was a small con, and they only sold so many tickets.
We had dinner with his editor.
We had dinner. Yeah, we did basically sit there. It was a pretty good dinner. So that's the night he told me to drink some sugar because my leg was going. Harlan Ellison.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was going up and down trying to sell stuff, correct?
He was selling because his which now was in his last collection, Cantankerous. But behold, there is a tiny man. It just came out in Fantasy Magazine or whatever, and he was saying, "You buy it," and Joe says, "Hey, James, watch this," and we all know what's going to happen. And Joe, what happened?
Pretty much right now, it's the equal to the meme. Here, hold my beer.
Yes, yes.
Right? I said he's trying to sell these things. He won't sit down, and I said, "Well, I'll buy the son of a bitch if you'll just sign this." He tells me to go do things to my anatomy.
Yes, and that's
he told me to go fuck myself. So Harlan Ellison told me to go fuck myself. So he goes back and we buy the magazine, right?
You buy the magazine. I bought. They had only that convention book. I bought that, a hardcover book. It was really nice. And then they had because he at one point wasn't going to make it to the convention. He was sick.
He was sick. Really, he was dealing with depression. Is what it was.
Yeah. But he had a cold and his depression and all of that stuff, and he got better and he came. But they had pre-signed some. Where you put them in the book?
Bookmark?
No. It's a sticker basically, and they were at least going to give those out. But since he was already there and he was going to sign, they were. If you bought one of his books there, one of his hardcovers that he carried with him, he would give you one, so you got an extra signature. And I bought a couple of those. There's a great book called Minefields that he did with a painter, I believe a Spanish painter, where he painted really like cars as dinosaurs, and he would make up stories.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
And they're cool. So I got that. I never had that one before, so I went and got it. That being said, we bought this stuff. He finally stops us, and he signs.
After he called the attorney a whore.
Yes, and
after he told me to do things to myself.
I have the mirror I'm going to give him, and he wrote a Daredevil comic book. And I'm like, I had all my books, and I thought, oh God, I would have him sign. And I wish I would have done like that one guy that was there. So when we first got there, he said, I'm signing for this man first because he's offered me $20 per book, and he had stacks of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wish I would have went, here's 60, sign my 3 books. But I was like, well, I have this one Daredevil comic book, and my plan was always to have it signed by him and have it signed by Stan Lee, and I've accomplished that now. But
you got that gun?
Harlan Ellison. Yeah, I'm done. It's ended.
Can I have that comic book?
No, go to hell.
He didn't sign it to James.
No.
Excelsior, bitches.
Harlan Ellison, after signing Joe's magazine and telling Joe what he can go do to himself, I start to stutter because Harlan Ellison was my living hero.
You freaked out.
I did. I couldn't speak, and I was
not bad, but you got
no. I was. It's one of the only times though where I couldn't recover.
And he went to sign something else. It's like, James, don't you want him to sign your comic book? Correct?
Yeah, and I was trying to be a buddy. I also have this for you. And he took the Spider-Man mirror and he looked at it, pulled it out, looked at it, wrapped it back up, put it down in the thing. Closed the box that it was in because I had it all packed up in a box, and said, "What the hell am I supposed to do with this? I am dying. I am dying. And then he takes this mirror.
I told the guy that I didn't want this.
Yeah.
Right?
I told him I didn't want this, and I was like, well, I have an email with, and he goes, I don't care. And he starts to hit me repeatedly in the stomach with the mirror.
True story.
And then...
Tighten up!
I have to say, I wasn't tightening up. I wasn't actually flinching enough. And he starts screaming, tighten your stuff. Tighten it up.
Yeah.
Tighten it up.
He's a 5'5", 70-year-old man at this time. He died.
And he's hitting me, like he hits me for 20. And I'm torn between laughing, probably crying somewhere there, and thinking, oh my God, this is my story.
Yeah.
This is my Harlan Ellison story.
And it's a good one.
I was physically struck by my idol.
With a Spider-Man mirror.
I mean, there's just to get
And
any
then-
weirder.
He takes my comic book out, he pulls out the sheet, which is funny, because you can tell he's a comic fan, because he doesn't jerk it out, he's like,
Yeah.
you, sir, are a ghoul.
Where are you from?
Kentucky. Yeah, where are you from? Kentucky. You drove from Kentucky.
You drove, not Grove.
Yeah, you drove from Kentucky to Madison, Wisconsin to have me sign your comic book. And I am at death's door. You, sir, are a ghoul. And he once gently puts it back in the
It's true.
closes it, hands it back to me, and storms off down the line.
I never talked to his. I think he talked to me that night is when he berated me for doing this.
Yeah.
You need to have you have some sugar. Have some sugar. And by the way, I'm a fat ass. Tell the fattest guy in the room of a bunch of other people who are obviously fat. Have more sugar.
But what's funny about that is we weren't at the front of the line. He never did sit down. We were still standing, and he was just going up and down the line.
You and I, after you got your comic book
yeah, after I
signed,
got it signed, I was like, "This is I mean, and God, the comic book is cool, and I have had Stan Lee sign it. As a matter of fact, Stan Lee, when he signed it, looked in the corner, saw Harlan Ellison's signature, and went, "Harlan signed the best place," and signed it across the top because there's one part of it that's slider, and you can see the signature better. Yeah. And that's where Harlan signed.
And then you got Jack Kirby. Oh.
Jack Kirby didn't do the art, prick face.
And the cool thing of it is he goes, well, actually, it was written by him and another guy, and he goes, I just gave him credit so he could get some money out of it.
Yeah,
I'm
he
the
needs
one who
some
wrote
money.
this.
He needs some money.
That was the other part of it. So we had a great weekend. We met a lot of interesting folks. We actually left early that Sunday. He was going to talk again, but I don't know what else craziness he could have done after 3 days of dinner, lunch, the dinner the night before.
Yeah, and just, I mean, it was the most
interesting thing, I think. One of the most interesting.
It was everything I wanted it to be. And other people were like, well, he was your hero and he hit you. And I'm like, that's the dream.
When we tell people that story, they often go, why? He assaulted you. But the thing is I just read Burt Reynolds' autobiography, and when he met Frank...
Capra?
No. Sinatra.
Stallone. I was going to say
and
Stallone.
He actually, I won't tell the whole story of what Sinatra did, but obviously it was a crazy batshit Sinatra story. And then once it happened, he got up and he said, where you going, Bert? He goes, I have my Sinatra story. It's not getting any better. And left.
Well,
and drove home.
So, and I know
I thought, same thing. You never, and it is. It's a batshit Sinatra story.
Well, and a little bit of a follow-up on that. Harlan Ellison, as being a speculative fiction, science fiction author, as much as he was, didn't like computers. And at the time, his wife still used dial-up. And so she ran a message board that he would occasionally tell her what to post. And it was about 4 weeks after the convention, I got on there and I was like, hey, thank you for coming to the con. That was everything I wanted it to be. Thank you. I was the guy that brought the Spider-Man mirror. And he posted back, it said, Susan, Harlan says thank you. Sorry about that. He's looking downward like a bad dog or something. I was like, oh, that's cool. And then later on, I wrote him a letter. And he wrote me back. And that was one of the coolest things ever because he said, you know, it was typical Harlan. He called me a mensch. He said, you're a real mensch. And you're obviously not like one of those troglodytes that only can communicate in 140 characters at a time. And I was like, that's it. I've got both sides of Harlan now.
But you wrote him to give him credit for something, right?
Yes, he in the convention. And by the way, I never did get exactly the answer. He never told me, and I'm gonna have to buy the recording to find this out. At the convention, he was talking about how he was getting older and he was going to die. And at the time, he was sincerely worried who's going to take care of Susan. Because one of the things, and Peter David actually had to do a GoFundMe recently, Diane Doohan, who is another science fiction author, because what people don't understand, there's no health insurance, people. You have a stroke, you have a heart attack, you're dancing without a net. Unless you're George R. R. Martin, who now has HBO money, one accident and you could be done. And he was worried about what's
specifically these people who were not in the Writers Guild, like the Screenwriters Guild, for things. You're not unionized. You're writing novels. You're writing short stories. You're writing books. There's no insurance for you, not unless you're buying it, and it's pricey.
And so Harlan Ellison was sincerely worried about that at the time, and he said when he was on stage, he was like, "I'm having to come to terms with the fact I'm getting older. I don't have to like it, but as so-and-so, and I can't remember the name, death is a wall that won't take whitewash." And I sent him a message going, "Who said that?" He wrote me back this very nice letter, still didn't tell me who said it. So I'm going to have to buy that, and I want it anyway because I was there. I want to be able to play those and listen to them again. But that being said, I know we're going long. Harlan Ellison...
We have more stories about that weekend, too, back with me and the drunk whore bidding over a Star Wars Rolling Stone.
And I've got, by the way, I've got something even cooler. I've got a...
if you run into us at a con, we'll tell you.
Yeah, I've got a bill signed by James Earl Jones and somebody's great. Felicia Rashad. Anyway, I say all that to say Harlan Ellison was, without a doubt, I came to terms, since he's passed, these past 2 weeks-ish, I've been thinking about it. Literally, he was my living hero. The world for me is less of a place now. And the reason for that, and it's not, nobody call anybody, I'm fine. But I think Harlan Ellison, you'll never get your inheritance now, Thaddeus.
I was going to split half.
I thought you called him fatty. I'm like, whoa, it's getting harsh. I thought you said fatty.
Why would you? He's not that. Why would you even say that?
I don't know. You're being a dick. I literally, that's not a joke. I thought that's what he said.
Anyway, Harlan Ellison was... So, I didn't have the best experience in school. I didn't have anything. And I think back to this, and when I read it, and then I read what he wrote on Star Trek, and I read they didn't... And I was a huge Star Trek fan. I am a huge Star Trek fan. And I read they didn't like Star Trek. And most of the time, that would have turned me off. But for some reason, I'm like, no, he's right about too much else. And I started to read about him. And yes, he was this crazy character. But at the same time... one of the things, he didn't promote the good stuff that he did. He did it because it was the right thing to do. There's a story about, in the 80s, when this was less common, about a kid that had cancer and having to go to school and being bald and all that stuff. And because of that, the teacher shaved her head. It was a female teacher. And then the entire class did it. Mm-hmm. Just to support this kid. And he found out about it. And he made a donation or did something to help the school because he was so touched by that. And he didn't tell other people he did it. He didn't. There was something about him going, that's just right. And so you hear those stories.
This is something actually my dad taught me.
And if you go back and read, people who think he was so harsh, go back and read his eulogy for Theodore Sturgeon. Theodore Sturgeon was another science fiction writer. They lived together for a while when Harlan was having trouble. Harlan was married 5 times, divorced 4, and he didn't have places to go sometimes. And he talks about people that would buy him dinner, just say, "Hey, Harlan, come stay with me for a while." Theodore Sturgeon was one of those. And he tells stories about, Theodore, he was trying to get something out and he needed something, and Theodore Sturgeon gave him $200. And he said, I found out later that was Ted's advance on his next book, and that's all he had, but he gave it all to me. And he said when he died, he called me shortly before he died, and he couldn't breathe well. And I said, "Ted, you're going to outlive us all." And he goes, "Harlan, no." He said, "I have one request. I want you to write my eulogy." And if you read that eulogy, the amount of pain Harlan Ellison shows, because he lost a friend, but he also just can't believe he lives in a world. And that's kind of how I feel without Harlan here, because he did so much different stuff. And one of my favorite stories by him is this one. And you're not going to find it, Approaching Oblivion. It's called Eco-Awareness. It's all of 3 pages. And the entire plot of the story is the planet Earth comes alive. It's been alive the entire time. And it's sick of the people living on it that are making noise, that are ruining everything for everybody else. So it just decides to start killing everybody. And it's hilarious. It is a laugh-out-loud story.
And that became M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening.
Close.
Are you going to read this?
No, the other one I do want to say is he does a great, hilarious, kind of romantic story called Prince Michigan and Hold the Relish. But this is, I'm not going to read the whole thing because it is a couple pages and we will go way over time.
We already are way over time.
Shut up.
Haley's just like, go.
So,
Turn around, this comes out Sunday.
Harlan Ellison, this was written in 1974, so Nixon and all of that stuff. And he talks briefly about, he gets a letter because he wrote an op-ed piece about what a tragedy it was that Kent State happened. And if you don't know, Kent State, the National Guard opened fire on students and killed some students. And he gets a letter after he said it was wrong. And I'm going to read this little section and I'm going to read his closing. Occasionally I get a letter that gives me pause. Mr. Chambers' letter was one of those. If I didn't know purely on instinct that he was running off jingo phrases that he'd swallowed whole, if I didn't know he was wrong purely on gut instinct or by association with student movements for 10 or more years, the reopening of the Kent State Massacre case by the Attorney General would convince me. It's too easy merely to disregard a letter like that and say, what an asshole. But consider the letter. It isn't illiterate. It isn't rancorous. It isn't redneck or written on toilet paper. It is a simple, polite, straightforward attempt to straighten out what the correspondent takes to be incorrect thinking on my part. One cannot dismiss this kind of letter. It is from an ordinary human being speaking about extraordinary events and genuinely believing what he writes. Chamber really does believe those poor innocent kids were communist tools who deserve to die. Now that scares the piss out of me. And he goes on, and like I said, I don't want to read it all, but he goes on to talk about what has happened. And what... Originally, when this book was licensed in 1970, he was going to write about how we could change the future. He said after that event, and after reading that letter, he changed it. And this is how he ends up changing it. As for the future, well, I'm brought in mind of a quote by Albert Camus. Real generosity toward the future lies in giving all to the present. And the present is being ripped off and screwed over by the omnipresent philosophy of I'm all right, Jack, which is a working class Englishman's term for screw you, baby, I've got mine. It's your future, and you don't seem to give a royal damn what happens to it. So the Ellison who writes this is a little more calloused and tougher than the one who went to Selma with King in March of 1965. Less hopeful and prone to sweeping Gardaloose. There's a word for you, Chad. Gardaloose. The Ellison sitting here now is an older version of the kid from Painesville who stopped trying to buck the tide of bigotry and stupidity and merely cut out to find the rest of the world. Had I done this book in 1970 as originally planned, you'd find it in the space a clarion call for revolution, a resounding challenge to the future. But it's 4 years later, Nixon time, and I've seen you sitting on your asses mumbling about impeachment. I've gone through 10 years waiting for you to recognize how evil the war in the Nam was. I've watched you loaf and lumber through college and business and middle-class complacency, pursuing the twin goals of happiness and security. What fools you are, happy, secure corpses you'll be. You're approaching oblivion and you know it, and you won't do a thing to save yourselves. As for me and you in this literary liaison, well, I've paid my dues. Now I'm going to merely sit here on the side and laugh my ass off as you sink into the quagmire like the Triceratops. I'm going to laugh and jeer and wiggle my ears at your death throes. And how I do that? By writing my stories. That's how I get my fix. You can OD on religion or dope or war or toad burgers for all I care. I'm over here watching you and giggling and saying, this is what tomorrow looks like, dummy. And he goes on a little bit longer, basically saying that things aren't going to improve. And as I reread that, I reread it about once a year, I sometimes think that he was more right than he knew. But I also know that if you read the other stuff that he wrote, he was always hopeful we could do better, and what made him angry and what made him the writer he was when we chose not to do it.
And that's our Harlan episode.
Rest
Harlan Ellison.
Rest in peace, Harlan. I'm sure you're up in heaven arguing with God about why the Bible's a hack job.
Why would you do that to an atheist?
I know. I was.
You would have just pissed him off.
I
You know what's funny is I will say this, and a little bit of a lighter note. Somebody, a science fiction author, and I'm blanking on who it is, so I'll try to give credit, and I'll comment underneath this on Facebook with credit. But said, if there is a better place, and said something similar to you. I'm sure Harlan's there having a good time arguing about things that didn't need to be argued about, but doing so very well.
Absolutely. All right. Well, this episode went a little long. Sorry, Haley, about editing it later. This was Harlan Ellison. Thank you so much for all the great entertainment, sir.
And enjoy your toad burgers.
Absolutely.
And you're chittering.
This has been
Chitlins.
Bonehead. Thank you. Have you tried Greek yogurt?
Roll credits.
Listen, Jamie Lee Curtis wants you to get
I
that
was-
When Jamie
up.
Lee Curtis wants to fight Michael Myers and have you live a good 60-year-old pooping life, you're going to have to get one of those fecal transplants like Phil got.
Poop storm.
Poop storm. Oh, I need to turn my phone down.
Yeah, do we need to start this all? I think
No,
we do.
I don't think. I think we've got plenty for the after credits.